The Radical Secular Podcast, a demand for justice, equality, and rational public policy. Subscribe at YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and all the major podcast channels. Visit our website at theradicalsecular.com for articles, insights, and our complete library of episodes. Support us on Patreon, and follow us on social media.
Hello and welcome back to the Radical Secular Podcast. I'm Christophe Defoe.
I'm Sean Prophet.
And I'm Joe Kipinti.
It's our first episode during Women's History Month, and our guest segment today features the conversation I had with my friend Liz Wilson, an artist, a mom, and a passionate progressive. Liz and I discussed the importance of the art to human experience, as well as the uncompensated labor women perform in our patriarchal culture. We also reacted to the assault on democracy that's unfolding in Ukraine. But before we get to that conversation, you'll hear from Joe, Sean, and me about how we're thinking about the war in Ukraine. But first, I want to remind you that if you like our show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, check out our Patreon, and tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels, and we publish new articles regularly at our journal at theradicalsecular.com. The Radical Secular Podcast is brought to you by Cannibal & Co., located in downtown Jersey City and at shopcannibal.com. Cannibal, that's Cannibal with a K, stocks a rotating collection of goods ranging from apparel and accessories to home furnishings and fine jewelry. Cannibal weaves together its forward-thinking vision with its traditional roots to provide an expertly curated experience of unique and locally sourced finds. We're grateful to Cannibal for sponsoring our show. Okay, let's get into the t-shirts, guys. Joe, let's start with you.
Well, I'm sure like many of you guys here who are listening remember the X-Files from the 1990s?
Oh yeah,
and
definitely.
I enjoyed the show myself, but it does provide a cautionary tale for us today. Scully, remember the rational agent one, the scientist, came to see the truth that the imaginary mythical monsters, demons, ghosts, and aliens were indeed out to get us, and they are actually real, and the government's covering the whole shit up, right? And now 20 years later, we have tens of millions of Americans who believe all that stuff. And that gullibility is, it is what it is, but it's also been leveraged by authoritarians in our midst to rise to power. And that's the problem, because the real monsters aren't the ghosts and the demons. It's those who seek to destroy the progress humanity has made in the last century. And we should be wary of them. Our show is about a reasoned approach to a better world, and that includes exposing the true dangers that lurk in the shadows. The Orwellian ascendancy of the 21st century authoritarians is really what we're after here. The great liars of our age. Those are the ones we have to worry about, and we need to be sober to do so. So this t-shirt, kind of speaks to that. But I just want to see you guys to know that underneath it here, I've got my science shirt on. Just saying, okay?
Nice, very nice. I love
double stacking today.
Double stacking.
Totally, the 1-2 punch. Yeah. I love it. How about you, Sean?
Well, I have my I Stand With Ukraine shirt. And that's very on the nose, of course. I was trying to get the one that said, Russian warship, go fuck yourself. And there are quite a few of those out there, actually. And one of them being made by a friend of the show, whose name is Elizabeth Torres. But she is in Europe, and so it's not going to get here in time. So I figured I would just wear this one.
Very nice. Very, very nice. Definitely on the nose. And I am wearing my Wonder Woman shirt.
Very cool.
And it's apropos given our guests today. And we had a great conversation, which I'm looking forward to sharing with you all. And look, the truth is, and look, this is the image also that is for this show, right? The showrunner image that we have is this woman in the military, in the Ukraine army, with her hair pulled back and the little Ukrainian flag, and it just seems such a perfect photo to think about, because there's many women that are up there fighting on the front lines, right? That picked up Kalashnikovs and they're out there and they're fighting, and it just men don't even have that anymore, where we're the protectors, right? Right. Women have been doing everything else for so long. And now women are also doing that. And I just want to, on this Women's History Month, just really praise the women that are in our lives and that are running shit. And more importantly, these wars reflect how much we need a different perspective. There would be a lot fewer of these, I believe, if we had women, if there were a real 50-50 split in leadership. But anyway, speaking of which, let's just get into the Ukraine conversation. Okay. So I guess maybe we'll start with you, Joe. Anybody really? I don't really have a prompt other than to say, like, where are you with this? Like, how are you thinking about this? Shoot, Joe, go.
Well, I mean, imagine just not that long ago, this wasn't even in the radar for most people, almost no one, right? And all of a sudden, this crisis exploded in our midst a week ago, right? Started a week ago. And I'm looking at this and it's so tragic. It's so tragic because, I mean, I love the fact that everyone's cheering and everyone's rooting for the Ukraine and people are making fun of the Russians. And I love all that. It's awesome. But the truth, the reality here is that Russia is a far more powerful, entity than the Ukraine. And they're going to absolutely devastate that country, it looks like. I mean, I've been reading up on like experts and analysts, particularly people who understand the situation and understand Putin and his thing. And they're all saying the same thing, united. Just like Putin is not going to give in here. He's not going to give in. Mm-hmm. He's all in. And if he were to give in, it would delegitimize his regime quite a bit. And that's the last thing he wants. Mm-hmm. I mean, notice, I don't know if you guys caught this, but when the first hint of the thermonuclear threats that came from Russia, from Putin, they happened right after the West began to sanction the oligarchs and his money, right? That's what really motivated that, because it really is a corrupt, klepto autocracy. It really is. And these guys, these men, starting with Putin, really just are on top of their world, and they're controlling it with their 600-foot yachts, and these oligarchs, and they just are doing what's good for them. And he's playing the patriotic card. He's doing all that, which you need to do as a dictator. But ultimately, what's going to stop him? And he's already put so much into this war. He staked so much on it that I don't know how we're going to get out of this without an absolute humanitarian disaster of the highest proportion. And so that's very, very sad. It's very depressing.
It is. Sean, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts and so many things to say, but I won't.
Go for it, man. Go for it.
I wanted to start out by saying here about the women and everything you said about them. Women make life worth living. I don't know if I'd want to be in this world without them. And they are doing it's so much more than just being here for men. It's what they do for the world. And of course, they gave birth to all of us. And there is so much of a need to express a greater appreciation for women across the board, and also to walk the talk, instead of just having it be talk. So I think it's abundantly clear that we would have less war in the world. Not that women can't be warriors, like you said, and not that
right. That's those two different things.
That there haven't been historically, when if it were only women in the world, there would be corruption and war and everything else. It's not that. It's just that in the world that we have, there is such an opportunity here for mitigation and for justice and for women, because women. They did have the experience of giving birth, most women, and so they understand about nurturing life, and their solutions that they tend to come up with tend to be more humanitarian in general, whereas the men are traditionally the ones who are going out and defending and fighting and all of that. And men are more comfortable with the idea of killing as a means of protection. So there's just a whole different approach here. And I think, that's what progressives are trying to do, is to bring more women into power for that reason, because we see that everything is connected. And not in a conspiratorial sense, but everything is connected in terms of, because I know that's one of the three tenets of conspiracies, right? But in a real sense, when you get more women in power, you tend to have this, a better consensus. So,
well, I just want to say that in the 1990s, this was discovered by the development community. To empower women was to improve societies across the board. And the data is really solid on this. You empower women at all levels, not just the leaders, not just the presidents, but just at all levels, right? From the most intimate level to the top. You help women empower themselves. I should say more than that. Micro loans, all that stuff, right? All of a sudden, society gets better. It's amazing. It's like they discovered this, and this has been the model in the world, in the development world, for a long, long time. And it really does work. And we need to adopt it in our own society. We're a developed country. But women, for whatever reason, right, they're more sensible and more practical in many ways than men are. Right. And you mentioned a few reasons, Sean, but whatever they may be, they're more sensible about the bread and butter issues, about the nurturing issues. And so not that men can't be, they certainly can, and many of them are, but it just happens to work out that way. So the more women we have in leadership, certainly a parity would be great. And the United States doesn't have a really high level number of women in leadership compared to other countries, actually.
Right. That's absolutely right.
Certainly Russia doesn't.
Right. That's totally right. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I mean, the Soviet Union was, I think, more friendly to women, and Russia has now become openly hostile. I mean, it was only 5 years ago or so that the Russian parliament rubber stamped a law that allowed domestic violence to occur. And this was after having had very strong protections for women. All of a sudden, they're going backwards. They're literally passing a law saying that now it's okay again, and that men are not going to be punished for this domestic violence that is so rampant in that country.
Rampant. You know what's really interesting, guys, and what you're saying right there, that sort of going backwards, as you're talking about there, Sean, maybe think of it, and that is Russia right now, as it stands, is, and I've been thinking about this all week, is the future of the United States. If you want to see what a future dystopian United States looks like, go to Russia. It's not like it's not like Brave New World or something like that, right? It's just basically a kleptocracy, right? Most people are able to sort of get by as long as you don't talk about the government, right? There is a bunch of very, very powerful sort of power centers. If you just took Trump off the leash and let him go, you get Russia. Yeah. That's what you get. And I think that is a part of what this has. I hope that people can see that. I doubt that people can, but I really hope you can. Like, if you want, this is what modern kleptocracy / strongman authoritarianism looks like.
You can say,
I was going to say one thing to be aware of when you look at the authoritarian side of the Republican Party is the absurdity. Like, we saw this ridiculous outburst during the State of the Union. We see the incredible disrespect, the making up of insane theories like Jewish space lasers and whatever other crazy things that the Republicans have said. It's just it's multiple examples every single day. But this is, if you talk to people who've lived in totalitarian countries, that's what they say, is that the absurdity of the power and the absurdity of the science denial and the transparency of the lies. They know they're lying. You know they're lying. They know you know they're lying, and they're lying anyway. That was, I think, a Solzhenitsyn quote.
Yeah, it is a good point.
Great point.
Absolutely.
So important.
And also, Christophe, to your point about Russia being our future, if we if we, continue on this path. Also, Brazil comes to mind there for me. Like we're really seeing the Brazilification of America right now. And in fact, who is the only major global leader that's actually supporting Putin right now as the Brazilian president, who himself is one of these same characters, one of these really right-wing, ultra-right, authoritarian strongmen types that, there is not, like you, Sean, everything is connected, right? But some things are more connected than others, right? And there's definitely a connection here, right? There's definitely a connection. This has been a global movement, and Russia is central to that, but it's really been a loose global movement, and certainly a global ideology to go back to this machismo power, might is right kind of world. And it's terrifying for everybody else.
I want to point out something that I read this week, not only the full hour speech that was made on February 24th announcing the war, but also there was another speech of Putin's that I read where he was speaking to, I believe, Davos. And very, very long speech. And this is what a lot of people don't understand, is that this man is very competent. He's very well educated. He's intelligent. And a lot of people look at him as a madman because his actions are insane. But if you actually look through what he has been saying in his multiple speeches, he spends a lot of time talking about gender ideology. He spends a lot of time talking about the weakness of the culture in the West. And one of his main goals, stated and unstated, is to prevent that culture from taking root in Ukraine. He sees it as almost a personal insult that Ukraine is a society that is free, democratic, equal, all of those things that we wish our country was. I mean, we wish America was like, no doubt Ukraine had some corruption, and there's always been corruption there left over from Soviet times and even now. But the fact is that it was moving towards a systems-based approach in which equality was the principle, human rights were the principle.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this is something that is almost probably more threatening to Putin than having NATO on his doorstep, is having an example that people can see within families. Because there's a big shared family heritage between Russia and Ukraine, the Slavic heritage.
Yeah.
There's intermarriage, there's intermingling, there's travel, so all of that. So what would happen is if Ukraine is this prosperous, equal, democratic country, and with all these family ties to Russia, that's almost a bigger threat than NATO bombs and weapons, because it undermines the legitimacy of this authoritarianism.
And let's not forget that it's a very young democracy, only 30 years. There has to grow, it has to evolve. To condemn it for, some, corruption here and there is just ridiculous, right? It was doing incredibly well for considering its history, considering all the circumstances, the recentness of everything. It was really doing amazingly well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's why I think that the outpouring of support for Ukraine has been so hardcore, right? Like this is what differentiates it from Afghanistan or from Iraq, right? Is that there is, we see ourselves there, right? We see, for two things, we see ourselves in it. And second of all, to your point, Joe, is that it is a good story of democracy, right? And I think what you're talking about there, Sean, in terms of that being the real threat to Putin, I think is very real. I've also recently listened to Pod Save the World, and they had one of these guys who's been on the ground in Moscow for a long time and knows on Putin particularly. And as Putin has gotten increasingly isolated, he's gotten increasingly nuts. So they say that this is now basically like stage 3 Putin, right? Where he's been reading these insane books that there's a whole idea that Ukraine doesn't deserve to exist at all, right? Like and he's just sort of it just goes to show that the more a strong man isolates themselves like that and they get crazier and crazier and crazier. And I just want to say one last thing, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up, is that let's talk about the racism, right? I mean, in terms of how this was covered, I just said, right, yeah, we right? We see ourselves in Ukraine, right? And you hear the people talking about it, and that would be one thing, but that really quickly becomes, these aren't like, you saw the racism at the border, right? At the checkpoints, right? And this is very, very real. I think we can hold two ideas in our head at the same time. We can say, Ukraine we should all feel for Ukraine. We need to support Ukraine. This is a democracy that matters. But also, there's been some really racist ass shit around that. Let me shut up now. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I concur 100% in what you said, Christophe. I think that we need to face, like we've been talking about this forever, guys, right? We need to look inside and face our implicit and innate, racism. And we're embedded in this culture. We grew up in this culture. The whole civilization arose out of an extremely racist history. And so the idea that we should just ignore all that and say, we're not being racist. No, whenever there's an opportunity to look within and grow and evolve as we take it, right? And this is one of them. Yes, there is an unfairness to it. Countries of color don't get the same compassion and attention. They just don't. And I mean, that's not debatable. I mean, it is a way. And so let's talk about it. Let's confront that. Let's grow as human beings around that. Don't get defensive, people. Don't cringe. Don't deny. Open your hearts and minds, for fuck's sake. I'm sorry. I've had to deal with this all week.
That's absolutely right. And I wanted to speak to also the irony that just 2 weeks ago on our last episode, we were covering this Russian siege of Aleppo. And all of us, when we were talking about that, were saying, hey, these people are just like us. They're speaking English. They have the same technology we do. They were in a cosmopolitan a multicultural society. All of those things make us feel like they are like us. However, they are not. They are brown people, right? They are Muslims. They are part of a different culture. And that is a culture which a lot of Americans view as alien. Right. And so when the question came up as to whether we were going to intervene in Syria, they were looked at as being the other, the lesser, we don't have to, worry too much. And of course, the same problem here, that we didn't want to be going directly up against Russia. NATO has avoided assiduously for decades getting into any direct conflicts. They've all been proxy wars. And so the idea that we would be trying to enforce a no-fly zone over Syria or Ukraine, for that matter, puts us in direct conflict to where we might be shooting down Russian planes and vice versa, and that could escalate extremely quickly. So I think that there are important similarities and important differences between these things, but the racism part definitely plays a role into how enthusiastic. I mean, we had standing ovations on both sides of the aisle for support for Ukraine, but crickets on Syria.
Yeah. So, and I just want to say quickly that everyone, we're all alike. We're all like us, all humans, right? It's just the imagination, the perceptions that differ. And there is no difference between, a crisis like this happening in Africa or in Latin America or in Europe or whatever. And ultimately that is the truth of it. And we just have to grow and learn and get there,
Yeah. One thing that I wonder how you guys think about this, actually. So as a younger person, and for large parts of my life, I've been very into the idea of revolution, right? And the older I get, I want revolution. I want radical change in some sense. But at the same time, I realize that you really upend, that kind of stuff upends people's lives, right? So, and with the Ukraine situation, we're talking about right now, right? Precisely because of what we're talking about, that these folks live lives that are very, very similar to ours in many, many ways. And it's I can picture myself, and we talk about this with Syria as well, right? It's can you imagine just what it feels like to have the power go out? And how disruptive that is, and that's power going out not because of a bomb; it's just going out, right? And when you radically change something, Like, right? The people who end up suffering the most are the poor people. Always.
Yeah.
Right? And typically poor brown people, right? That's what ends up happening.
Yeah.
Anyway, you guys want to comment on any of
bursting
that?
at the seams on this one because
Me too.
The point is that we talk about war crimes, right? We talk about bombing a hospital. We talk about bombing a kindergarten and cluster munitions and vacuum bombs and all these things. Okay. Those are definitely war crimes. But what's also a war crime is when you hit a dam and you take out a city's water source, or you hit the power plant, and you've got people who are, they're on equipment, they're on essential, there's essential electrical uses that, transportation. I mean, you cut people off from being able to escape. There's all sorts of ways that war is a crime against humanity and a crime against a civilization. And the worst part about this is that the Ukrainians didn't do anything. I mean, they were just living their lives peacefully. They didn't attack anybody.
Really
There's not even a pretext. And looking at Putin and his pretext, right? Denazification. He's the fucking Nazi, right?
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit later.
He really is.
But,
Go for it, Joe.
I do want to say something to you, Christophe, about the revolution thing, and there is sort of this, like, I don't know, sometimes it's just anger and frustration. You just want change, so let's have a revolution. Sometimes it's the glory and the romanticism of it. But I'll tell you, like, even though I have such a bittersweet feeling about, like, cheering for women fighting for war. I mean, yeah, great for women to have equality and have that. But at the same time, I don't want anybody to have to do that. I saw this interview of this young woman, a Ukrainian woman. She must have been in her mid to late 20s, and she had this, like, assault rifle in her hand, and she was, like, crying and a little bit shaking a little bit, and she was going off to fight. And she was a school teacher. She was an elementary school teacher, and the interviewer asked her, "Do you know how to use that weapon?" She just said no. She was sitting there with this fucking weapon in her hand, and the world expects her to fight. And she's a school teacher. She just wants to teach little children how to read. I mean, it's like
these are people with no choice. They have no choice, and that's why we're seeing.
And
that's right.
And I think yes, wonderful that they're fighting back, but damn that they have to. I mean, it's just awful.
It really is awful. I want to sort of flip the script a little bit here. As we discussed in our last episode, hopelessness is very, very disempowering. This is a really shitty situation, but let's try and get positive about it, right? So in what sense, if any, maybe there isn't, but in what sense should we be hopeful with respect to Ukraine? What is the silver lining here? Is there a silver lining here?
Well, authoritarians shroud themselves with a veil of Orwellian-like deception. They don't need to fool everyone. They just need to fool enough people to turn the tide in their favor. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia may be lifting that veil, at least for some, exposing these charlatans for what they are, authoritarians and brutes. It's not just about Putin, but all those who supported him and his causes all these years, or even right here in the United States. Because of his blatant aggression, more people can now see through his bizarre claim that he's fighting anti-Nazi causes and all that. But the world knows Zelensky isn't a fascist. Putin is. The world knows that. The alt-right has risen to power in our own society with that same Orwellian shroud of deception. People like Tucker Carlson and others have gone to the top of their rankings, he himself having gathered, the biggest audience in the news media, because he's accorded the freedom that exists in this nation. That's how he got there, through the freedom. And he has risen to that level, to those heights, by leveraging the false claim that freedom doesn't exist in this country for voices like his. So it's like up is down. For years, the alt-right has also claimed that Ukraine is a corrupt nation and not a true democracy. This lies arose from their support of Putin and then Trump and the impeachment and all that. And so now they justify a powerful authoritarian state crushing yet another young democracy trying to establish himself. War is peace, right? But more are seeing through Mr. Carlson's ruse and people like him. His support of Putin has exposed his deceptions. Perhaps more people will come to see that Tucker's unwavering support of laws that restrict the right to vote and undermine democracy does not make him a freedom fighter, but a sycophant playing mind games with us. Hopefully more people will come to see that the cause he serves is worse than nonsense. The tendrils of the alt-right have extended across our culture in every way possible. They are in ascendancy, as we've talked about. Now, a lot of people are beginning to see through their Orwellian deceptions because of this war. Perhaps this will blunt their growing power. But no matter. I mean, all of us who see through the deception have a responsibility to speak truth to power here. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what we are trying to do in this podcast. This is why we speak. Up is not down. War is not peace. Muslims and Central Americans, caravans aren't the existential threat. It is not white people who are being racially oppressed in America. Putin, Trump are not the saviors. They're four lights, guys.
Yeah, that's just really super well said, Joe. And I got to almost give you applause for that, because you summarized, the things that I've been kind of thinking about all week. And especially when you look at unprecedented changes in our media landscape are also on their way, in the sense that, RT around the world is being shut down. RT America is laying off staff. I mean, there are major propaganda, warfare that we're not going to be dealing with anymore. And it's even beyond a shift in perception, right? Because I think cybersecurity is going to ramp up. I think that we're going to, a lot of people are taking a lot of things more seriously. Europe is starting to take its own defense much more seriously and increase their defense budgets, which is highly overdue. And I wanted to say something else too, and that is that we've kind of been in a 22-year-long stupor about who and what Vladimir Putin is. And he was able to finesse, because, we had Gorbachev and we had Yeltsin, and finally we have these reasonable leaders, coming from Russia who aren't out to destroy the world. And Putin kind of came out of nowhere. And what it turns out is, and this is pretty well documented from any number of sources, is that Putin created a false flag attack on some Russian apartment buildings in about 1997. And it was used as a pretext to really go in hard in the Chechen war. And I don't have a lot of details about all of this, except that there was pretty well-sourced knowledge that the bombs were placed by FSB agents. And the reason is that there were 4 apartment buildings, I believe, that were bombed. And the 5th one, they found a dummy bomb and they found FSB agents planting it. And they claimed that it was some sort of a test or drill or whatever. But, like the whole Ukraine invasion was supposed to be a drill, right? So these tactics of propaganda are well practiced. And then, Putin, they've invited him into the G7 and became the G8. We tried to get him in trade agreements. He was standing with all the other democratic leaders of the world as an equal. And then we saw, the situation that happened in Georgia, and then Crimea, and then all the other situations that have happened. And at each point, the West has buried its head in the collective sand. We don't want to face a nuclear armed adversary that is hell-bent on reforming Europe, right? So that is something that now we are being forced to come to terms with. And I think that is a huge silver lining, because when you have this kind of great power competition, if you don't know you're fighting, you're going to lose.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well said. Well said. And, I agree with you guys. And I do think there's a silver lining here, right? So when Putin invaded Ukraine, I believe that he began the end of his presidency in many ways, and also struck a really huge blow against worldwide authoritarianism, right? Putin was the prototypical modern authoritarian, shrewd, in control, unstoppable. And this crisis reminds us that, setting ethics aside, strongman authoritarianism is simply not an effective way to run a country. No system that relies so utterly on one factor, one person, is resilient enough to survive in the long run. And also, one person cannot wield that much power for that long without losing touch with reality. And objective reality does exist in spite of the propaganda. And eventually, one's failure to live by reality's rules will catch up with them. So, Putin now has unified the world community. He has made Russia an international pariah, and he has, in some sense, disincentivized would-be authoritarians. They now see what happens when you pull that kind of shit. So there is a silver lining here. It's not a big one, but I think in connection with the sort of things that you guys are talking about, that's what we should be looking at, right? That's what we should be like, holy shit, this is a shift in perspective, and that matters a lot. That really matters.
It does. Yeah. Good point.
He's harder to defend. I mean, only the real right-wing lunatics are defending this at this point, right?
Yeah, you have to want to destroy gender ideology, right? More than you want one person, one vote. That's basically kind of the definition. If you want to have cultural supremacy.
Yes.
And that's more important to you than democracy, and those are the authoritarians.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well said. Do you want to jump in on that, Joe?
Well, I think Sean said what I was going to say. I mean, literally. But the other thing is, what comes to mind to me is the military dictatorship in Argentina that was deposed, and they lost legitimacy. I mean, that matters. That really matters.
Yes.
It really does. Even though they control everything, even though there's no democracy or anything to get them out of office, it still matters that they have this spell over the country with enough people to support them. They can keep control. But if that spell is broken, then they lose. They die. The regime topples, and that could happen with Russia.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a long, slow process, right? And I expect that it would be. So when I say it's the end of his presidency, it obviously isn't, but it has to begin to end somewhere. And this was a huge gamble. And I just don't think in the long run it's going to pay off. Now, if you're Ukrainian right now, you don't give a fuck about the gamble. You don't care about the silver lining, right? So from our privileged perspective, we can talk about it this way. But nevertheless, from that broad perspective, it finally allows people who didn't like Putin, countries that didn't like Putin, to take the gloves off. There is clear, uncontroversial evidence that this guy is bad for the world.
And this model is bad for the world, as you said.
Yes, the model is bad for the world. Exactly. It doesn't work in the long run. You may be able to pull it off for a long time, but eventually people really care about being free. They really, really do. You can only keep people under your thumb for so long. It might take, again, generations, but people will not put up with this shit forever. They just won't.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what is going on inside of Russia right now, which is a tremendous fragmentation. And you have to look at, so Alexei Navalny is Putin's primary dissenting political opponent. And as everybody knows, he was poisoned and he went into exile, and then he came back to Russia bravely and inexplicably. I don't know why he knew he was going to go to prison, but now he's this huge moral authority. And he had a tweet storm that I thought was pretty good. And he drew attention to the fact that almost 10,000 people in Russia have gone out into the streets knowing they were going to be arrested. And when you get arrested in Russia, it's not like being arrested here. I mean, they rough you up. Right. You might lose your job immediately, no matter what. You might face, I don't know, eviction from your apartment. I don't even know what. I don't know what they do. They ruin your life. Definitely. And even though people knew their lives were going to be ruined, they went out there, almost 10,000 of them, in many, many cities across the country, and they protested. And I think that's huge. And I think there's another thing that's huge, is that some of the Russian oligarchs who are now expats, one of them has offered $1 million reward for the arrest and prosecution of Vladimir Putin as a war criminal.
That's amazing, right?
That's amazing.
That is powerful. This is what I'm saying. This is pulling on the thread. Even the people that support him are like, yo, this is fucking crazy, man. What were you thinking? We were doing fine. What are you fucking thinking? But look, guys, we are getting to our end of time now. So I just wanted to thank you both for your super helpful perspectives on this. I always love talking to you about it. And I want to now move on to our guest segment. Liz Wilson describes herself as a painter, a maker, and a mother. Liz has drawn and created her whole life, and she's a graduate of Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. When Liz and her husband Matt had children, Liz's art career took a back seat. But once the kids were a bit older, she returned to the art world. And now she creates and sells her paintings, prints, and patterns at her website, ebwillart.com. I'm pleased that Liz found the time to join us, given her busy schedule, to share her perspective. So without further ado, The Radical Secular presents Liz Wilson. Liz, welcome to the show. I know you've got your hands full on the day-to-day, so thanks for taking the time.
You're welcome. I get to be here.
Awesome. And let's talk about your shirt. What you got?
Oh, well, this is not the one I was originally going to wear. I was going to wear one that says hysterical woman on it. But this is my, here we go.
Oh, nice. You got the feminist power fist,
yes.
Essentially, right?
Yeah, I bought this right before the Women's March after Trump got elected.
Oh, wow. And what a time that was. Right, that moment. It's we're in like in a new style of terrible times, but in some ways it still feels better than what it felt like right after that election. Like that was awful, Yeah,
that was a real come to Jesus moment.
That really was.
I think a lot of us were laboring under the illusion that things like sexism and racism were like not really a thing anymore. And
That's
then,
right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
And more than anything else, right? I feel it's like men probably, right? So let me put it this way. Men would probably walk around feeling like sexism isn't such a big deal. Mm-hmm. White people walk around thinking that that racism isn't a big deal. Mm-hmm. And white dudes just walk around being white dudes. But
I can't even imagine.
I just can't even imagine. It's just like, wow, everything's just great all the time. But that was a real moment. In all seriousness, that was a real moment. And you're right. That was just like, holy shit. Mm-hmm. This is not... For me, it was like, this is not the country I thought I was living in.
100%.
And that's why it was such like a gut punch, right?
Yeah.
Like now it's like, what's happening now is like, yeah, this is definitely the country I live in. Like, right? Like this is the world I live in, right? Putin exists and this is happening and this is but back then.
Well, I think we were all like in our little la la land, as like kids of the 80s and 90s. And then.
Yes.
For sure. And I remember it was so emotional for me, and it took me a long time to realize. I think it was because it was like, oh, guess what? You can be literally the worst piece of shit on earth, but if you're a white dude, you will beat anybody, even the most qualified candidate to ever run.
Totally.
Because she's a woman. So that felt really like...
Okay, it was a gut punch. It really was. Yeah. I mean, and what you just said there is so important. And I think that this can be I think this can be very difficult for some folks to wrap their minds around. White guys, especially. I don't mean to just crack on white guys the entire show, but it was. Everyone was really upset by it. That was progressive, obviously. It was like, holy shit, we lost. But there was something, I think, I can't speak for women. I can speak for myself as a Black person, that it was very emotional. It was like, it wasn't just some sort of intellectual shift in what I thought the country was. It felt very personal. Yes. It felt like I was personally being attacked.
100%.
Like everything, like it was like an identity crisis in some sense, right?
It was like America was showing you what it thinks of you, which is nothing.
Well said. Which is nothing. Exactly. You don't really fucking count.
Right.
And we've been kind of pretending for 40 years that you did, but you don't really, when it really comes down to it.
Yeah. You were looking at our pretty little wallpaper that says we don't have sexism and racism anymore, but that got pulled down and you see that it's all rotten underneath. Yeah.
Totally. And that was a doozy. That was a doozy.
It was. And you're totally right that I feel like it set the stage for like the next, what year is this? 6 years?
22. I don't even know anymore. I mean, basically since the pandemic started, I just sort of I stopped counting at years.
I mean, it's still 2020 in my mind and in my body.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, totally.
Yeah. The fact that 2020 was 2 years ago is fucking mind-blowing.
It's fucking mind-blowing. It boggles the mind. You're like, wait, how is that possible? What happened the last 2 years? And by the way, how can we talk about how much actually did happen in the last 2 years?
I know.
mean, from George Floyd, remember? That happened during the pandemic. I mean, whoa. What?
Was that 2020?
I think that was 2020.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And that's like, so yeah, it's like a lot has actually happened, but it also feels like nothing has happened.
Right.
And meanwhile, here we are on the brink of not, I don't want, no, we're not really on the brink of a nuclear war, but it feels that way and it's terrifying. So, like we're going to talk about a couple other things, obviously, over the course of this show, but we can't not talk about Ukraine. Like when we decided to do this conversation, none of this had really hadn't exploded yet, and so and now it's so relevant we can't not talk about it. So I mean, where are you with it? Like, how do you just where are you with it?
Where am I with it?
Like, what jumps to your mind when at this point?
Just exhaustion. Like, I just feel honestly at this point, I was already tapped out. My adrenals were tapped out from the pandemic. And it's like, oh, World War III. Like, if this had happened in 2015, I don't know what we couldn't have handled it. But now I feel like we're prepared.
That's a great point. No, it's a great point. We're like all tougher now.
Oh my God. And I really felt like the pandemic, like a big lesson for me was just the realization that we need to work on getting comfortable with discomfort. With not knowing what's around the corner, with not being in control of the situation, which for me personally is I'm a control freak. So that's very uncomfortable. So I feel like we're kind of still in that mindset a little bit. And now I'm like, World War III around the corner? Maybe.
That's such a good point, right? Because it goes back to what you were saying before, right? You kids of the 80s and the 90s. I think you grew up with this. I know I grew up with this assumption of like peace, kind of, or just like predictability.
Yeah.
And since really, in some sense, since 2016, that has been all upended. Yeah. And then there's the Black Lives Matter movement. Then there is the pandemic, and now there is this, like just a blatant, outright attack on democracy. And you and I were chatting right before we started recording, and we were talking about, right, like why this feels different than Syria, why it feels different than Afghanistan, why it feels different than Iraq. And part of it is just because it's just such an obvious, it feels like such a cleanly, purely wrong act, right? Like it doesn't feel like there's a lot of gray area here.
And I feel like you don't even, and I could be wrong because I do have some sort of history knowledge just from my college years, but I don't feel like you don't have to have a history degree. You don't need to understand a lot of the politics behind this to see what is right and what is wrong in the situation.
Totally.
So maybe that's just me. But certainly racism plays into the reason that we're focusing on Ukraine and not on Syria, not on Afghanistan. But I don't think you can ignore the fact that this looks like a very, very clear line in the sand.
Exactly.
What is right and wrong, and the potential global consequences of it
are tremendous. And that is important, I think. And in a world that's increasingly fractured, right? The irony of this is that as this man thinks that, like, all right, maybe this is the moment that I can pull this sort of thing off, right? Because NATO is weak or whatever, right? People don't like Biden and X, Y, and Z. But meanwhile, in some sense, he is pulling the world together in like a remarkable way, and pulling Americans together. I mean, I got in a stupid argument about something on Facebook with somebody, which I really try not to do.
Facebook arguments?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of the scenario. I think it was some guy. It was Oh, you know what it was? It was at a Swedish hockey game. A bunch of people held up a sign that said, fuck Putin. And this guy was obviously conservative, and he was like defending Putin. And I just made like sort of some comment, and then people, like a million people liked it, right? And so then Facebook pushes it up, right? So then people just keep responding. I was like, I knew I shouldn't have said anything. This was stupid. Why did I wade into this? But even at the end of that conversation, he was like, he said, well, I guess we can agree that Putin should go. And I was like, well, yeah. So the point is, I'm arguing with this guy, and like at the end of the day, everyone kind of agrees. You have to be like a real lunatic to not agree with this, and I guess that's the point I'm getting at here.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's just something I was thinking about. Putin and Trump and their relationship, and you were talking about this like huge rift in our culture and our society, and like just the fact that people are living in their own bubbles of media consumption and friend group, and this contributed to us all thinking Hillary Clinton was going to win the election.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
So, but in that way, I would be curious to know if maybe Putin, living in the Trump world of reality, believed that he would have support.
Yes. Oh my God, I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm totally with you on that. With you on that, because I think because he lives in a similar media ecosystem that Trump does, where everyone tells him exactly what he wants to hear.
Right.
And he reads.
In fact, you could say it's even more like that because he's a freaking autocrat.
Exactly. Exactly. And isn't it really, have you seen those pictures of him like sitting on the opposite end of these like comically long tables? Like his advisors are way down the thing. They're like a mile and a half away because he's so
juxtaposed with, and then you see Zelensky like in the bunker with his thing on.
With his big balls, which I love those memes that are flying around. Things you can see from space, right? Fucking great. You got the internet at least gives you a sense of like, oh, okay, we can, there's things here that we can smile about, right?
It's true.
These are the good things in the internet. There's a lot of really bad things, but Zelensky's got big balls, and that's very funny, right?
Yes.
But well, look, let's sort of get into, who knows, maybe we'll get back to Ukraine as sort of the elephant in the room here. But I want to talk a little bit about you, Liz, because we're here to talk about you, and you went to Pratt. And you mentioned, which is in Brooklyn, everybody, an amazing school. My friend Tim, in fact, Tim Stetner as well. Liz also went to Pratt. And you mentioned that before you went to Pratt, you had some tangents. And I want to talk about those tangents because I had similar tangents on my way to law school. I actually don't know if they're similar, but I also had some tangents. And without obviously talking about anything you don't want to talk about, but what were those tangents? What was your delay, I guess?
Yeah. Well, my tangents were I went to Rutgers for my undergrad degree in history and anthropology.
Ah, okay.
I didn't know what I wanted to do. Well, see, this is the thing. I think I did know what I wanted to do, but it's not practical to be an artist, right? I didn't have any role models in my life for ways to make a living creatively. So I just basically stuffed it down for a long time. So I went to, and I thought, if I major in something that is interesting to me, then that'll naturally lead to a job that I love, right? It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Totally.
So I went to Rutgers. I did lots of random things. I worked at a law firm. I worked at a nonprofit. I managed a grant for a little while. I nannied. I went to law school for a month and a half.
Oh, shit.
Yes, I did, out in San Diego, because I thought that I want to change the world. So I thought what I need to do is learn the tools of the man, and then I can use those tools to save the world. And then I was sitting in class one day, and the teacher was talking about how much she loves being a lawyer. And I thought, it just hit me like a lightning bolt, like, I don't want to be a fucking lawyer. Why am I here?
Right.
So I left.
Nice.
I think it just got to the point where it was like, I tried so many other things that I knew. I kept thinking like, well, this is kind of cool. This is kind of interesting. And then it just wasn't it. Until I kind of ran out of options. And I was like, I guess I'll have to go to art school. And it's funny that you bring up Tim because I credit him with being my catalyst for doing that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because Matt and I, my husband, then boyfriend, when we were dating, I was living in Philly. He was in Brooklyn. And I would come up every other weekend. And I was up one weekend and I met Tim Statner. And we had this conversation. He had just started, I think, at Pratt. Or he was just about to start. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but something about that conversation just made me feel inspired to take the leap. It made it feel more practical and realistic. So, yeah.
Wow.
So I did that.
That's awesome.
Those are my tangents.
But look, I mean, it's how do we get to these places in our lives? I mean, I think my path was to law school. I, like you, thought that I felt like I wanted to change the world, right? And I thought about politics and I thought about all this stuff, and I didn't know exactly how one gets there. But I figured that if I became a lawyer, I could somehow like manifest that, right? It's like not clear how that would work, but but even before that, right? I mean, I went to college and I had like, it's funny that we're talking about Matt and we're talking about Tim, but like, you know, I had a lot of problems growing up, with drugs, and it took me a long time to even get back to college, let alone to law school. And I was just driving, like I was trying to get my life back together, right? I was 19 years old. Life was just spinning out of control. And I'm like, look, what am I going to do? And I got my act together and I was like, I'm going to go to college. And then, and for the first time ever, I was like, oh my God, I'm good at school. Like I had always been a terrible student growing up. And so I was like, oh my God, I'm good at school. So I was just like, go. And then I got to law school and I got to a good law school. And I graduated and I was like, and I'm at a law firm now. And I'm like, this was what it was all going to be about. And oh, wait a second. This kind of sucks. Like, you know, I work all the time. That's all I do is work my entire life. And it's not even meaningful work, right? Like I started at a nonprofit organization and that was great. And that really fucked up my ability to be a good law firm lawyer, I think. I was just like, this is just so empty. And so I now work at a different organization and it's a good job and I like it. I was in the legal field and it really works for me. But really what I'm interested in is writing and art, you know, I feel like that's what has, at the end of the day, I ask like, how can I contribute to social justice, right? How can I make people happier or do something that's positive? And I think what's important is to look inside oneself and be like, what is my gift, right? Like, there's some things I can do, but what can I be really good at and feel good about, right? And I kind of feel like that's where I landed, but it's really hard. Art is hard, right? Because like, how do you make money making art? Like, what are your frustrations? You're an artist. You're like a real artist, right? Like I'm just a guy who does stuff, but you're like a real artist. Like you do art, you sell art, you do cool stuff, right? You know, you're obviously talented. What kind of, what do you love about doing art? What do you hate about doing art? Like when I say, what is art for you? Like go for it. Just talk about it.
Well, first of all, I will say that you say creating this line between us that I'm an artist and you're not an artist is bullshit and I hate it. So don't do that. And that really speaks to my general ethos about art. And that is that it is an intrinsic part of the human experience. And every human being has a creative impulse and it can certainly manifest in many different ways. And it's not always going to be in a painting or a piece of music, but I have issue. I take issue with the way that our society, culture, school system is set up to as we get older, separate the artists from the general population.
Yes.
And there are lots of methods that are employed. The whole coloring between the lines thing, and I think probably goes along with development as you're growing up, that you become aware of other people's opinions about things and that sort of thing, and get self-conscious about, like, does this really look like a flower?
Right.
But I do think in general, it is not something that's valued in our culture. I mean, you just have to look at, like, schools getting rid of the arts programs to see that
the first
that's
thing
true.
that's cut, right?
100%. Yeah. And then if you look, people who do take the leap and have either the confidence and or the talent to then say, I'm going to make a career of this. I mean, look at how musicians are treated. Look at how they're paid and undervalued. Unless you're freaking Beyonce, you know, it's really hard. I have a lot of friends and family who work in the music industry, and they struggle. So yeah, and visual artists are not adequately compensated.
Right.
So anyway, so that's a whole cultural mindset thing that drives me crazy, because I think everybody's an artist in some way.
I hear that.
So what was your question? What do I
Well, I
love?
mean, it sounds like you've hit on a lot of it, which is, you know, I this idea of, so let me put it this way, you know, right, like Tim, let's use Tim as a great example, because Tim is a really great artist. He's been for as long as I've known him. And another friend of mine, Luke, he's a graphic designer, and you know Luke, yeah, you know Luke. We know all the same people.
Oh my God.
And Luke, so you know Luke, and I was just talking with Luke yesterday. Actually, I ride motorcycles with Luke all the time. So, and we, you know, and it's like, you either do the art the way you want to do it, and you can't it's really difficult to make a living. It's you struggle, or you like sell yourself essentially, right? Like you go and you work at an advertisement where they sort of like, you know, it's like milking a cow to death or something like that, right? Like and so you're right. I mean, this undervaluing of art in our society and and maybe that's why I sit here and say to myself, I'm not a real artist, right? You know, like, because like, it feels like, you can't, what am I trying to say? It's like, you can't be, you can't be taken seriously if you're an artist unless you're like Beyonce, right? You know, unless you're selling thousands and thousands of dollars worth of paintings and galleries and all this sort of thing. And that's really, that's fucking bullshit, you know?
Yeah. Well, and you combine that with the fact that making art is, to me, the most vulnerable thing you can do. Like, you are really just putting yourself out there, right? There's no amount of like protective sarcasm that you can like put in front of a thing. Like, it's just your most earnest you is just there.
Well put.
And so I think that makes it even more difficult then, because you really like, I mean, to get to this point, I'm 42 years old, right? As a child, I drew compulsively. I still have notebooks from when I was like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. I made things all the time. I didn't think about it. I didn't wonder, like, how will this translate to a career? Right. I didn't think, like, are people going to like this? Is there going to be a market for this? I just made it because I just had whatever it was in me, just needed to do that. So, you know, not only do we do a huge disservice to our freaking humanity when we stuff that down or cut it off or make it something that is just a way of getting income. It was clear to everyone around me and myself as a small person that this is something that was an important part of me and something I was good at. But I did everything in my power to avoid doing it because it's so fucking scary. Like, it's so scary. And it took me getting to this point. I mean, I literally took 10 years when I was raising my kids where I don't think I even picked up a pencil. And this can tie into our other subject, because the way that our culture is set up, our patriarchal culture, women who become mothers are encouraged to lose their identity. So I had a huge, upheaval of like my sense of self in those 10 years, not just with losing art, but trying to be some role that has been arbitrarily assigned to me because I produce children. So it took, my children are now, 10 and how old are they? 7 and 10. And they are gone all day at school. And I suddenly was sitting there like, fuck. Like,
Right,
who am I and what am I doing with myself? Right. And it took me getting to that point of almost having to like rebuild myself to have the confidence and the self-awareness, the awareness of my own mind and the gymnastics that I do to myself, the negative self-talk, all that fun stuff. And I don't know that I could have done that as a 22-year-old.
Wow.
So
Wow. That so many things I identified there, not with the motherhood part, obviously. But nevertheless, first of all, just the scariness of putting yourself out there, right? I follow, I'm in these writers, writers Twitter, right? And so much of what I see on there are people say, I have 3 manuscripts on the shelf that I haven't submitted, that I haven't pitched, right? And because it's just like and I can identify with that, right? I write something, and I got something that I just finished writing last night, and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking of like, where am I going to submit this thing? 'Cause I'd like to get it published, and I'm thinking to myself like, but the fear of just exposing myself, like that is so real. Yeah. It is, and it is so personal, right? And that is huge. And also just the idea that you mentioned too of rebuilding yourself, I think that's super important. And I think I experienced that in a little bit in a different way. I think for me, there was an identity crisis for me around Blackness, right? Having grown up where I grew up growing up in a totally white environment and spending most of my life like basically pretending not to be Black, right? And it wasn't really until like the last 10 to 12 years that I basically like build an identity around Blackness, right? So just that idea generally of having these societal structures, I guess, placed on oneself. And then getting to a point, and it takes maturity to get to that point, right? You're not going to get there at age 20, probably, right? Unless there's somebody to guide you, you're not going to do it at age 20.
Well, I was going to say, I feel like the people who do that are the people who have like real big parents who are just like, let me tell you what it's about.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right, right? And I mean, it must be gratifying for you to be able to have learned those lessons and be able to bring that into being a mom, especially as they get older, I imagine.
It's gratifying and terrifying.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Because I have wonderful parents. Like, I love them to death. We have a great relationship, but like, I'm still fucked up. So what am I going to do to my kids?
Right. I mean, parents can't help but fuck up their kids, I guess, in some sense, right? I mean, that's just, I mean, you're a human being, right? You're just doing the best you can.
It's true. And somebody said to me once, they're like, we're all going to fuck up our kids, and it's definitely not in the way that you think it's going to be.
Right. It's going to be in a very unique way. You're going to fuck up your kids.
Yeah. So you can't prepare for it. It's great. Fine. Let it go.
We kind of talked about this, and I'm glad that we did, because one of the things that I have on my outline here is talking about the pain of making art, right? Like, is it ever painful to make art for you?
Every time. Yeah, I'm just looking behind me because there's a particular painting that it's fine now. It's fine. But with almost everything I make, there is at least a period of time where I hate it and I am filled with self-loathing and self-doubt. But it's not even, it's like a physical sensation. It's this irritation of not being able to get it the way I want it to be. So therefore, then the brain spirals and I'm a hack and why am I God. So it's fine. And then I generally work through it and come back to it a couple of days later and I can manage it, but not always. But And every time it happens, I know intellectually, like, this happens and it'll go away, but it sure doesn't feel like that. It feels like this is it.
Right. That's exactly. No, wow. It's really, I'm so glad to wrap this conversation, because I'm really trying to get very like serious about writing. Right. You know, and I write every day, and I've been writing every day for a long time, but it really, and my wife, Lindsay, asked me, you know, but you like to write. I'm like, yeah, I like to, you know, it's a little more complicated than I like it, though. You know, I have to do it. If that's the answer, I don't really have a choice. Yes. I have to do it. And it's gratifying in some sense, but like it? Yeah. Sometimes it feels like I'm literally high, right? Like I'm flying, like I'm high as fuck. Then sometimes it's like a depths of just self-loathing, like, Jesus Christ, you fucking hack. Why are you bothering? Right? Like
100%. 100%. And that's such a great way to put it too, because it's like, I mean, you're choosing to be a pain. Like, that's what you want to do, right? So, right. But like, you're right. It's not like, I guess I want to, but it's kind of like, do you want to eat? Do you want to sleep?
Right.
Not to be overly dramatic, but I really do feel like that's how it feels. And I notice, especially if I go a period of time without painting and then I have a day back, it's like, I feel like I'm high afterwards. I'm just like, everything's amazing. And you realize what was wrong with you for the last week and why you were just like, you felt like you were in the beginning. Do you ever watch the movie Joe versus the Volcano?
No, I've not seen it. No.
Oh, it's so good. You should see it. It's like a classic, like Tom Hanks, late 80s, maybe early 90s. But the whole beginning is just him working in an office. It's a little bit like Matrixy, the way like Neo's just like green all the time.
Sure.
Yeah, but so that's how I feel if I don't paint for a while.
Right.
And I had a therapist point out to me one time. She's like, I work with a lot of creatives and I feel like there's just something different. You just need to do it or you're not going to be a happy person. Yeah. And it took somebody else telling me that for me to take it seriously and not just be like, oh, this is just Liz wanting to like mess around with her paints.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's actually legit. It's like going for a run or getting exercise.
Yes.
Like, gotta do it.
Yes. It's like
But that doesn't mean it's always fun.
No, it doesn't mean it's always fun. It doesn't even mean that I always want to do it. Right. You know, it's like, it's a complicated thing that's sort of just part of who I am, you know?
Yeah.
But again, some deeply gratifying in so many ways. I want to now talk about unpaid labor and about the women's experience with that. And I'm going to read a excerpt here from an issue of BJM, and the BJM is a weekly peer-reviewed medical trade journal. And quote, women spend a disproportionate amount of their time carrying out 3/4 of the world's unpaid work, 11 billion hours a day. Unpaid work refers to services provided within a household for its members, including personal care and housework. Globally, women undertake 3 times more care and domestic work than men. Unpaid care work is often perceived as low value and is invisible in mainstream economics, underpinned by entrenched patriarchal institutions and national accounting systems that fail to factor in women's total contributions. Unpaid care work is a major factor in determining both whether women enter and stay in paid employment and the quality of their work. Unpaid domestic and care work is associated with greater mental health burden and negative effects on quality of life. Women who lack the financial means to outsource more onerous household work are often burdened by repetitive, time-consuming, and physically demanding domestic tasks. This drudgery component, which makes up the largest share of poorer women's total unpaid work burden, may cause substantial fatigue and stress. Stress activates the release of neurohormones, including cortisol. Women who experience household tasks and childcare as highly stressful have been shown to have higher than average cortisol levels. The cognitive and emotional involvement from unpaid work and the lack of respite, for example, time for leisure and self-care, can eventually lead to physical, emotional distress, depression, and anxiety. End quote. Now, I imagine, Liz, that passage doesn't really surprise you, but does it? How do you what's your reaction to that? Does it infuriate you? Does it sadden you? How do you think about that? Complicated.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot there.
I mean, I feel like every sentence you read, I had about a paragraph to say about it. This is something that's interesting because I would say, it was sometime, I think, between my first and second child, so 5 to 10 years ago. So I was a stay-at-home parent. My husband was making the money. And I choose those words very intentionally, because saying that someone is a stay-at-home mom and someone else works is just very indicative of the way that we view these roles, right? Stay focused. So I came across an article because I had a small child, and I spent a lot of time talking to other moms in the neighborhood. I mean, Brooklyn, the only thing to do really was take the kid to the playground. Right. So then that became my social time too. And I got turned on to this article that was talking about unpaid labor, invisible work. And it was the first time that had been put into words for me. It's something that I had certainly felt, but I think so much of our sort of patriarchal programming, it wasn't something that I had examined or even noticed. It just kind of was. It was a very interesting process, actually, becoming a stay-at-home parent, and then Matt and I having to figure out, sometimes with a lot of mess, and it took years, but to sort of unpack our own programming about what that meant and what it looked like. So he certainly learned a lot about invisible labor from me. I'm
sure he did, yeah.
And he's definitely going to listen to this, right? So right. I can't say anything mean.
We love you, Matt.
Not that I would. No, he's wonderful. But yeah, there's a steep learning curve for both of us, and it really makes you realize how much there is unexamined in yourself that's been, I keep saying it, but programmed into us just by growing up in this culture, right? So yeah, I have so many thoughts about this. I mean, when you talk about what even is unpaid labor, right? Or invisible labor. You can say housework, but who actually stops to think about what that means? And I actually think there's two types of invisible labor. I think one is tangible and one is intangible. So you have tangible being housework, right? Cleaning the toilets, vacuuming, cleaning the entire house. But then it's not just that. You're doing laundry. You're the one who knows where everything is. You're organizing your home. You're keeping track of your cleaning supplies. You're restocking things. Your brain is sort of you have constant inventory in your head, right? And that's and then cooking, meal planning, food shopping, all that kind of stuff. So that's the very tangible stuff, which still goes unnoticed. It's the kind of stuff that if you're doing it, nobody notices it, right? But then there's intangibles. There's I know all my kids' doctors. I know their phone numbers. I know where they are. I know when their last appointments were. I know when they need to go again. Same with dentists, dermatologists, all the things. There's this idea that women are and I want to be clear, I'm also talking from my experience as a cis heterosexual couple. And although I have heard that this can bleed over into homosexual relationships, into non-binary, because the reality is we all grow up in this system. So we all are going to download this to an extent. But in my situation, women are looked at as the go-to contact for social events too. So like when Matt and I started dating, like seriously, like when we moved in together, it was striking to me that every time his family, his family of origin and extended were planning gatherings, they would contact me. And I would be on an email list with all the women, none of the men. Even though none of us women are related by blood, we were the organizers. So that's sort of like, and then like buying gifts, like who does all the Christmas shopping, all the Hanukkah gifts, all the birthday gifts, all the shower gifts, all the wedding gifts, like who keeps track of when those need to be purchased and from where and wraps them. And, so there's a lot. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even have I didn't even necessarily notice that I was doing all that. Mm-hmm. Do you know who Glennon Doyle is?
Yes. Yeah, I do.
Okay, so she has this really great analogy, which she calls the ticker tape, which is just that she has a ticker tape going through her head 24 hours a day, thinking about like who's doing what, when are they doing that, where are they going, what do we need in the pantry, what's this going to be, and then also, all her work stuff. And I think that over the last 10 years or so, I think there's been a light has started to be shined mm-hmm. on that. But it's still like, this comes from a patriarchal structure, right? This classic 50s housewife thing where this is our division of labor and this is how it's set up, and it's set up that way for a reason. And we have been sort of like picking that apart. We've been unraveling it, but it's like the closer we get to the core of the knot, it's harder to see it.
Right.
So I think we're starting to see that stuff now that has been so intrinsic and dark and deep and hard to see, that it takes a lot more effort. Like you really have to think about it. And so when I'm rambling a lot, but Matt and I, when we, I had this moment of realization. So I had 2 small children, home all day with them. Yes, this was our agreement, but there was a period of time where my dear husband would come home, and in his mind, like, he goes to work, he comes home, and he's finished work, right? And we had arguments about this because I said, but when do I get to be finished work? Like never. It's 24 hours. And yes, this is what we decided upon, but I think we weren't cognizant of what that labor actually meant at the time, right? And so what we eventually came to is this realization that, so his outside work is, 8 to 10 hours, whatever it is, and he comes home, and then my job becomes split in half, ideally, and he takes half and I take half. So we're all both working 24 hours a day. It's just that like in the evening hours, it's a little bit lighter. But this took like 2 very like progressive people with progressive parents, like hours and hours and hours and hours of conversation to arrive at,
right?
So we got a ways to go.
Man, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I think that's so important. I try to make an analogy, and I frequently try to analogize here. So there was a long time where I was very blind to this as well. And this was even after mm-hmm. I was rah black. I'm a black man, right? Getting to that place and then looking at people around me, most of whom are white, and realizing, wow, the extent to which people didn't get it made me mm-hmm. have to rethink how I was thinking about my relationship with women and with feminism and with, right? Because I'm just like, mm-hmm. how do I point the finger, right, without delving into my own shit on this, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then I started looking around, and like the stuff that you were talking about, I laughed when you said that, because they said that, right, that women are you're put on the list of the email list to I'm still guilty of this. I'm still guilty where I'm like, all right, Lindsay, let's do this, and then she makes it happen. Right? You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like, and it is true that she's better at it than I am, but she's better at it than I am because I wasn't socialized to do it in the first place. Like, that's why she's better at it than I am. And it's not because she's inherently better at it. Right?
Right. And this is really the stuff that I feel like we're unpicking right now. This, like, there's been for so long, this assumption that, like, oh, well, women are good at XYZ, men are good at XYZ. But, like, are they? Or is it just that one of them has not been required to learn this because they've had somebody else, their mother or their sister or their partner doing that for them?
That they just don't have to. And I see this. Yeah. So one of the things that I have tried to do, because one of the things that really struck me, and when and I've heard this before, and it's something that I take very seriously, is, like you say, the unpaid mental labor that women tend to do, which is basically holding like a bunch of plates up in the air all the time, right? And then men walk in and they're like, oh, well, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'll take out the garbage, right? Just tell me. Right? But it's like, no, that's not the fucking point, right? That's not the fucking point. The point is, like, right, you take ownership of that. And so that's what I've tried to do, right? So and it's still, I still know that it's not at the level of what Lindsay does. I know it's not, right? But I take, it is like, I do the laundry, right? All the laundry. We don't have any kids, so it's not the same as having kids and doing laundry. But still, it's doing laundry, right? So and it's not just like. And my goal is to take that off of Lindsay's mind altogether. Right? All she has to do is open the drawer and there's clothes there. Right. That is right. So that's my goal. Right. Same thing with with dishes, with garbage. And I do all the outdoor stuff to the traditional man stuff. Right. Like, I cut the grass and I do the outside stuff and all that kind of shit. But, but that's the kind of stuff that guys like to do anyway. So it doesn't fucking count. Right. Like, it's like. Do
they though?
I enjoy doing that stuff. I mean.
Well, that's great.
But but the outside, but what I think, and this is what I try to encourage, and it's not just enough for me to do it myself, right? It's also to tell my male friends to do the same thing, right? Because and that's the other thing is like, look, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, I'm pro social justice, except for when my friend doesn't, I don't stand up to them, right? And so it's like it's about taking those mental responsibilities off of my partner's plate, and so that's one less thing. She plans all the meals, then she's got to shop, and that when I see her going through that, I'm just like, Jesus fucking Christ, it seems like a nightmare. And then you got to cook it at the end of the day, and she works all day, by the way, right? She comes home, right? Right. And she works out of the house. But it could be in the house too. The point is you work all day. And then after that's all done, you then have to cook, it's just like.
Right. You do more work. Well, that's the thing the other thing about it is like, I am in a position where like my designated job was to stay at home. So that had its own set of like difficulties in terms of sorting things out. But then all the women I know who also worked outside of the home would then come home and clean the toilets, do the shopping, blah, blah, blah. And I just was, but I really do think awareness is like 75% of the battle, because you can't undo what you've been trained to do all your life completely like that, right? But if you're aware of it and you're open to hearing when you get feedback about it, that's a game changer. Like Matt will do this thing now where he'll be like, do you know what the temperature is? And he'll be like, sorry, never mind, unpaid labor.
Oh my God,
and
I do the same thing. It's so funny. I do the same thing because I ask my wife these questions that I can easily find the answers to. But I'm like, why am I asking you that? No, that's not your job. I got my goddamn phone. It's right here. That's so funny. That's so funny.
It's so true. It's so true.
But yeah, half the battle. That is half the battle, right? Because if you got like a decent progressive guy right? Chances are he wants to
Right.
do the right thing, right? But again, has not been socialized.
Right.
I feel that, and again, I keep going back to this analogy, but I think about good, progressive white people, right? Sometimes I got to be like, that was not and they're like, oh shit, my bad.
Yeah.
Why? Right? And that's it. And that's it. And then it's a done deal. And it's like, and we can move on. And I think that's the best we can ask of ourselves and each other.
Right. I think we have to have a lot of generosity and compassion for ourselves because, you know, we all grew up in this system. We're doing our best. But the key, like you're saying, is to actually listen. It's actually interesting because what you say about comparing, you know, thinking about women's issues in relation to your own experience with racism and things like that. I had the flip of that, which is like, to me, feminist issues are so obvious. You know, it's like I saw somebody say the other day that nobody understands a group of people better than the people they oppress. So I can tell you everything that you want to know about patriarchy and toxic masculinity and all that fun stuff. And when I realized that that was completely applicable to racism, like how I don't understand my own privilege being a white person, right? And that like maybe, you know how we're saying like believe women?
Right.
Maybe we should also believe Black people when they tell us what their daily lived experience is and not just say, well, that's not what I see, so I think you're exaggerating. Or like, it's not that bad.
Right.
You know? Like, listen. When people tell you their experience, just listen.
That's right. Just listen. And I mean, and I'm sure that you feel this from the feminist side is that like when someone genuinely sits there and listens, that is like so powerful for me as a Black person. When someone is just like, oh shit, like, okay, I believe you. I hear you. I mean, that simple act is just so powerful because it's so unusual, right? Like, right. You spend most of your life walking around not being, at least implicitly, if not explicitly, not believed. So when someone does, it's like very powerful and kind of just like, oh, wow. Thanks. You know?
Especially at face value without you having to be like, well, in this study in 1995, it showed blah, 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 blah. Like you have to back it up with data. Like, no, this is how it feels to be a woman.
Right. That's enough.
Right. And it can be shocking to you. Like that whole Me Too movement was shocking to me because there were so many things that I just thought like, this is just the human experience. And then to realize that like, no, not everybody is scared when they walk home at night. Like not everyone has been sexually assaulted. Like it blew my mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that just believing people. Oh, and there's just also this really great trick, which probably works for racism too, I would imagine. But of course it does. You flip it, right? So in any given scenario, look at this invisible work situation, right? Imagine if men were asked to keep the house completely clean, do all the cooking in the house, manage all the children's schedules, and work full time, but women could go work outside the home and just come home and have a beer and put their feet up.
Yep. And then when you think of it that way, it's just like, oh.
Right. And that's a pretty mild example. There's this great book. There's this great book called The Power, and it's fictional. But what she does is she flips the script. So it's about a society where women hold the power that men hold in our society now.
Interesting.
And you're reading it and you're like, this is fucking ludicrous. Like even in as small a detail as an email that a man has written to a woman in this book, right? So the way that he minimizes himself, that he does all these like exclamation marks and like softens everything he says. And it just reading it, it's so ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it really clarifies it. Because even for me, like even as a woman, I grew up thinking that the white man was like the prototype human,
you
know?
Totally.
So it takes a minute for my brain to kind of like be like, oh yeah, that's not just like kind of lame. That's like utterly ridiculous.
Absolutely. And I read N.K. Jemisin. She's a writer, a sci-fi writer, which is, and she's a sci-fi fantasy writer. And that's not really my genre, but she's a Black woman, and she's like, and she's just an unbelievable writer, and I just appreciate really good writing, right? And so I've been reading her books that were suggested to me, but one thing she does all the time, and every time I'm just like, you fucking patriarchal fuck, whenever time I read her, because I'm talking about myself, because I'm like, because what she'll do, and I think she does it on purpose, is that she will say, the leader of X, Y, and Z did A, B, and C, and then she went to this, and you're like, oh, wait a second, I was in my head that was a guy, in my head that was a man, and she was, and that, but no, that was a woman. I'm like, oh my god, boy, I am.
But I mean, for me too, I do the same thing, but the reason is that exactly that we have. It's like when the Ghostbusters with all women came out, and all these bros were like up in arms about it. I didn't see the movie. Maybe it sucked. I don't know. But the point was they were up in arms before it even came out.
Conceptually.
And I just, And like, why would we want to go see some chick flick? And the fact that women-centered movies are called chick flicks and that black-centered movies are called black movies is like
it just is that. It's like, and then people don't see that, right?
Because no, and God forbid that a white dude should have to watch someone who doesn't look like him and project his own experience onto that. Because we have been having to do that our entire lives.
That's the experience.
Every hero in every movie is a white dude. So I had to empathize with him and try and imagine his experience so that I could enjoy the movie. Everyone else is real good at that.
Right. Yeah, it's my god, it's so right. And this same thing happened, but like I'm very into Star Trek, and we all on the show are, and so like the new shows that are coming out are very diverse, and it is awesome. Okay. It is just because Star Trek was always relatively diverse, but not like this, right? Like this is like the new captain is a black woman, right? To put things in perspective, right? That is, and the bros. Damn. Oh my God, Liz, the bros have lost their shit, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's like what? So like you're mad because you don't see yourself in the character? Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? You know? Come on.
Yeah, you want me to feel bad for you?
Man, yeah.
It's been 40 years of this for me. Come on.
Oh, man. Well, look, I mean, we're getting toward the end of the show. I want, like, what do you, is there anything, what do you think men should be doing differently? Like, what, if you were like, I want men to do this, what would it be?
I mean, honestly,
I guess we kind of touched on it. Yeah.
Said it. Listen, just listen, and not just listen, but like, just believe us. And I don't mean like if we've been raped or not. I mean like believe that too. But also, when I tell you like I'm exhausted from planning everybody's day, don't be like it's not like that.
Right. Listen. Right.
Yeah, just listen.
And you know, one of the things that I really want to do as we do these segments is really just try to elevate women and people of non-traditional voices, right? That's really important for me with these segments, which is, and I think because it's one thing to be like, oh yeah, you know, I think women should be able to say whatever they want. I think black people should be, but it's like, I think the goal should be to put those folks first, right? I think that is how you start to have, I think, meaningful conversations. So I'm really glad that you came on to do this, and I really hope that you'd be interested in coming back. Would you have anything you want to plug, your website or anything you want to plug before you go?
Sure. My website is ebwillart, all one word, .com. EB like Elizabeth. I just put up actually some shirts on there that say Slava Ukraini. I totally butchered that. But glory to Ukraine. It's to raise money. So I'm not going to take any money from it. All the profits are going to go to care.org. They're doing stuff on the ground with refugees. ebwillart.com, on Instagram too. And yeah, you'll see what I'm up to.
Awesome. And everybody definitely go check Liz out online. Check out her website. Check out her Instagram. She's always got great stuff on there. And Liz, thanks so much for coming on. It's been really fucking fun.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Little old me.
Little old me too.
I love that you're doing this. It's awesome.
All right, awesome. Take it easy.
Yeah.
Well, I thought Liz was really awesome. She's a good friend of mine, but also just a really great communicator and just an interesting person. Do either of you want to make any comments on that or about last comments on Ukraine before we close out?
I had a couple subjects that I thought that she really that she touched on that I thought were really good. The first one, of course, is the unpaid labor and the division of household labor. That is a huge deal, and I think that all of us men can do better. Mm-hmm. I think from what you were saying, Christophe, I think you do pretty well in your house. I could probably do better. And I think I wanted to just talk a little bit about how that happens. It happens because we grow up that way. It happens because our mothers do things for us. In my case, we had household staff. So, you don't get used to doing those things. I had to learn in my, 30s or whatever, after I was divorced, I had to learn how to take care of myself. And that's something that a lot of men have issues with. And it's a deficiency. Like, men should be learning cooking and laundry and sewing and all that kind of stuff, just as much as they should be learning, auto mechanics or home repair or anything else like that. Like the soft skills that they're involved in raising a family are just super valuable for men, because guess what? Not only are you taking over a more equal portion of the labor, but you also feel more empowered in the relationship. And I think that there's a lot of guys who they don't know what the hell to do when their woman isn't around. They don't know how to make themselves some food. They don't know how to do really much of anything. And so I think that puts a lot of guys at a real disadvantage.
Yeah, I agreed. And working with that labor thing, the workplace, I think Liz's point about the intangibles, the mental labor were amazing. It made me think. I mean, in this age where we live right now, in the information age, where information and processing information and managing information is so powerful and central and important, here are women doing it all the time at this level, right? Yep. And getting zero recognition for it. I mean, and they really are. That's right. Women do all of that mental work, keeping track of the kids' appointments and and all of that stuff, which is crucial to a functioning family. Totally crucial, right?
That's right.
And men just just expect them to do it and would think it was weird if they didn't. I mean, it's like, whereas
it's true.
I mean, and it's like, we got to do that too, right? We have to.
Yeah.
And in ways that are very intangible, like you can't measure them necessarily, but they're so important.
That's right.
But they're so important. I also loved what she said about art and how to approach art as part of the life and this sort of artificial separation between artists and everyone else. I thought that was wonderful. She was great. It was really a pleasure listening to her.
She's very, very insightful. She's very, very insightful. And I'm with you guys. I take an active, for years now, I've been really focusing on this unpaid, because I watch my wife do so much more than I do. And we both have full-time jobs, right? We both do all this kind of stuff. And again, it's mostly more the things is that the intangible stuff and having the mental and emotional energy that it takes to keep those many balls in the air is a lot. It's a lot. And like you said, it's not as quantifiable as how much money did I make this year or various ways of productivity measuring or GDP, right? And that's why it's just invisible. And that's going to be the title of the show, right? Is invisible work. And it is so fucking critical. Well, look, guys, I know we could probably talk more about this as well, but we don't want to go too long here. So I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you guys for being here. And remember that if you like our show, to make sure to subscribe, leave a review, check out our Patreon, and tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels. We also publish new articles regularly in our journal at theradicalsecular.com. I'm Christophe Defoe. Thank you for being here, and remember that wherever you are, you can be radically secular.
The Radical Secular podcast is written and produced by Christophe Defoe, Sean Prophet, and Joe Okipinti. Logo and main title designed by Tim Stetner. Post-production and original theme music by Sean Prophet. Special thanks to our support team, Lindsay Brightman, Jillian Sky Jacobs, and Lori Field Okipinti.